Postpartum hemorrhage remains one of the leading causes of maternal morbidity and the mortality worldwide. It contributes to more than 25% of maternal death. Yet importantly, most of these cases are preventable with timely recognition and management. Caesarean delivery, now one of the most frequently performed surgical procedures globally, accounts for a significant proportion of births. However, it is strongly associated with an increased risk of postpartum hemorrhage, making it a major contributor to maternal mortality, especially when there are delays in diagnosis and management. One of the biggest challenges in managing PPH is the difficulty in accurately estimating blood loss. This often leads to delayed recognition and intervention, although organizations like the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have provided a guideline for measuring blood loss during cesarean delivery. Reliable assessment still remains a challenge in clinical practice. Furthermore, there is limited research, especially addressing PPH management in cesarean setting. Current guidelines often do not differentiate management strategies based on the mode of delivery, which can mask the unique challenge associated with cesarean-related hemorrhage. Therefore, understanding the perioperative and delayed causes of PPH in cesarean delivery is essential. This includes identifying underlying etiologies and applying both medical and surgical treatment approaches effectively. Now let's discuss the underlying causes of postpartum hemorrhage in both cesarean and vaginal delivery. The causes are commonly remembered as the 4 T's: tone, trauma, tissue, and thrombin. Uterine tone accounting for 70% cases, trauma 20%, retained tissue 10%, and thrombin less than 1%. Causes of postpartum hemorrhage and specific to cesarean delivery include extension of the hysterectomy, incision in the body of the uterus, bleeding from the bladder flap, injuries to the broad ligament, and bleeding from the adhesive disease. Postpartum hemorrhage during cesarean section require rapid coordinated management. There is limited direct evidence, so most guidelines like American College of Obstetricians and Gynecology apply principles from vaginal delivery. First step, immediately inform the anesthesia team and begin simultaneous medical and the surgical management. Monitoring continue real-time quantitative blood loss measurement until bleeding is controlled. Uterotonic therapy core of management. First line treatment IV oxytocin, dose 5 to 10 international units IV bolus, followed by infusion up to 40 international units. Oxytocin is more effective and has fewer side effects than misoprostol. Even if already given prophylactically, repeat oxytocin is still effective. Second line uterotonics if bleeding persists. Use when uterus does not respond adequately. Carboprost, PGF2 alpha 0.25 mg IM every 15 minutes. Total maximum 8 doses given. Can also be given intramyometrial. Methyl ergonovine, commonly used especially in the USA, effective with low risk of serious cardiac events. Sulfoprostone, prostaglandin E2, preferred in some European guidelines. Tranexamic acid is a powerful antifibrinolytic agent that plays an important role in the management of postpartum hemorrhage. In the general population, tranexamic acid has been shown to reduce death due to bleeding in trauma and decrease surgical blood loss and transfusion requirement. In obstetrics, the landmark Women trial demonstrated that early administration of 1 gram tranexamic acid given slowly intravenously after the diagnosis of postpartum hemorrhage significantly reduced death due to bleeding without increasing adverse effect. However, it is important to note that tranexamic acid did not significantly reduce the combined outcome of death or hysterectomy. Timing is crucial. Tranexamic acid is most effective when given within 3 hours of birth, with a clear reduction in mortality compared to delayed administration. When we look specifically at cesarean deliveries, the benefit is less clear. Subgroup analysis and recent trial is high-income setting have not shown a significant reduction in bleeding-related outcome or transfer need when tranexamic acid is used prophylactically. Similarly, the MOMENT-2 trial found that prophylactic tranexamic acid in anemic women undergoing vaginal delivery did not reduce postpartum hemorrhage. Despite these limitations, large meta-analysis confirmed that tranexamic acid reduced life-threatening bleeding events overall. Although this effect is mainly driven by data from low and middle income countries, importantly, bundle approach like the EMOTIVE trial shown that early use of tranexamic acid combined with standard first response measures reduce severe postpartum hemorrhage and related complications. Current guidelines recommended early administration of intravenous tranexamic acid 1 gram as a part of the first line management of postpartum hemorrhage regardless of the mode of delivery. In summary, tranexamic acid is most beneficial when given early as a part of the comprehensive, timely responsive to postpartum hemorrhage. When postpartum hemorrhage persists despite medical management including multiple uterotonics and tranexamic acid, surgical intervention becomes necessary before closing the abdomen. The first step is a careful search for a specific cause of bleeding such as unintended extensions of the hysterectomy or injuries to the broad ligament that damage uterine vessels. Any identified injuries should be promptly repaired with sutures. In some cases, particularly intraperitoneal venous injuries, manual compression for 5 to 10 minutes may help control bleeding without causing further tissue damage. Topical hemostatic agent including ferric subsulfate, oxidized regenerated cellulose or thrombin gelatin and collagen fibrin products can assist in controlling diffuse bleeding, especially in the bladder uterine space. And evaluating the posterior uterine wall is important to rule out occult uterine rupture. If no specific injury is identified, surgical management focus on uterine sparing procedure such as vessel ligation or uterine compression suture. In life-threatening cases, peripartum hysterectomy may be required to achieve definitive hemostasis. Bilateral uterine artery ligation is a highly effective technique reducing uterine blood flow by up to 90%. The procedure is performed using absorbable suture after exteriorizing the uterus and creating a window in the broad ligament. The suture is passed through the myometrium approximately 2 to 3 cm below the hysterectomy incision. If bleeding persists, a second ligation known as stepwise or low ligation can be performed 2 to 3 cm below the first. This helps occlude additional branches supplying the cervix and improves the hemostasis. Performing this second ligation systemically may be beneficial as a single ligation can sometimes result in incomplete vessels occlusion. Overall, uterine artery ligation has a high success rate ranging from 93 to 97%. Importantly, future uncomplicated pregnancies are still possible after the procedure. It is a simple and rapid technique that does not delay more definitive management such as peripartum hysterectomy if required. Complications are rare with retroperitoneal hematoma reported in approximately 1% of the cases. Rulnikov triple ligation is a modification of bilateral uterine artery ligation. It combines ligation of the uterine arteries with additional ligation of the round ligament and the uterovarian ligament. This approach further reduces uterine perfusion and helps prevent the return of blood through collateral circulation. Reported success rate range from 77 to 100%. Another approach is stepwise uterine devascularization. This involves a sequence of progressive steps, each performed only if bleeding is not controlled within 10 minutes. The sequence includes unilateral uterine artery ligation, followed by contralateral ligation, then lower bilateral uterine artery ligation, and if necessary, ligation of the ovarian pedicle on each side. This method has reported success rate between 72 and 100%. However, bilateral ligation of the suspensory ligament of the ovaries should be avoided as it may impair fertility and can lead to ovarian failure. Uterine compression sutures are an important surgical option in the management of postpartum hemorrhage, particularly when medical treatment fails due to uterine atony. Bell-inch sutures are widely used worldwide with an overall success rate of around 75%. The Bell-inch technique works by placing a brace-like suture around the uterus, compressing the anterior and the posterior wall together to control bleeding. It can be performed after closure of the uterine incision. In contrast, the Cho technique involves multiple square sutures that directly approximate the anterior and the posterior uterine walls, creating a hemostatic compression effect. Over time, several variations of these techniques have been developed, although no single method has proven superior to another. The main indication for uterine compression suture is postpartum hemorrhage due to uterine atony that is unresponsive to medical therapy. In terms of outcome, most women do well. About 91% resume normal menstrual cycle within 6 months, and approximately 75% of those wishing to conceive again achieve a successful live birth. However, complication can occur rarely. Uterine necrosis has been reported more commonly. Uterine synecdoche or intrauterine adhesions may develop in about 5 to 10% of the cases. For women who experience persistent menstrual disturbance after the procedure, especially those planning future pregnancies, hysteroscopy is recommended to evaluate for adhesions. Although no direct comparison exists between uterine compression suture and vessel ligation technique, clinical experience suggests that both uterine artery ligation and compression suture are generally easier to perform and effective compared to internal iliac artery ligation. Evidence on effectiveness of adding a second uterine sparing surgical technique after failure of the first is limited. However, available data suggests that uterine compression suture, when performed after failed uterine artery ligation, can successfully prevent peripartum hysterectomy in more than 80% of the cases. This highlights an important principle in hemodynamically stable women. It is reasonable to attempt an additional conservative surgical procedure before proceeding to peripartum hysterectomy if initial measures fail to control hemorrhage. The choice of technique often depends on local practice and institutional experience. However, the most critical factor remains the surgeon expertise and familiarity with the procedure. In general, bilateral uterine artery ligation or uterine compression suture are recommended as the first-line surgical option, as they are relatively quick and technically straightforward to perform. Some clinicians prefer starting with uterine artery ligation, partially due to concern about rare but serious complications such as uterine necrosis associated with compression suture. If bleeding persists despite these measures, internal iliac artery ligation may be considered. However, this technique is technically more challenging and is usually reserved for cases where simpler methods have failed. Overall, a stepwise suture preserving approach guided by clinical stability and surgical expertise is key to optimize outcome in postpartum hemorrhage management. Peripartum hysterectomy in PPH. When a woman becomes hemodynamically unstable or in cases of massive postpartum hemorrhage with ongoing uncontrolled bleeding despite uterine sparing procedure, peripartum hysterectomy must be performed without delay. As emphasized by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, early decision making sooner rather than later is critical to save the patient's life. Hysterectomy is considered the ultimate and definitive treatment for postpartum hemorrhage, although it results in permanent loss of fertility. The prevalence varies significantly across the region, occurring more frequently in low and middle income countries compared to high income settings. One of the strongest risk factors is cesarean delivery, particularly when associated with conditions such as placenta acrita spectrum, where indication for cesarean and hysterectomy often overlap. While preparing for definitive surgery or awaiting senior surgical support, temporary life-saving measures such as external aortic compression, uterine tourniquet techniques can be applied to reduce ongoing blood loss. The choice between total hysterectomy and subtotal or supracervical hysterectomy is usually based on the surgeon's judgment, as strong comparative evidence is limited. Although both approaches have similar maternal morbidity, Subtotal hysterectomy is generally faster and helps achieve quicker hemorrhage control. Total hysterectomy is preferred when bleeding involves the cervix, perimetrial tissues, or in cases of placenta acreta in the lower uterine segment. Certain factors can increase surgical complexity and maternal risk, including high body mass index, adherence from previous cesarean deliveries. In these challenging scenarios, rapid decision-making, surgical expertise, and timely intervention remains the key to improving maternal outcome. Intrauterine tamponade and vacuum devices in refractory PPH. Several intrauterine devices have been proposed for managing postpartum hemorrhage that does not respond to medical treatment. Among these, intrauterine balloon tamponade, particularly the Beckery balloon, is the most commonly used. It works by exerting outward pressure on the uterine walls to control bleeding. Other alternatives include the EBV tamponade system and even improvised device like a condom catheter. Overall, intrauterine balloon tamponade has a good success rate around 86%. However, its effectiveness appears slightly lower in cesarean deliveries compared to vaginal birth. Importantly, the complication rate remains low at less than 6%. That said, evidence supporting its use specifically during cesarean delivery is limited. In most cases, the balloon is inserted after abdominal closure and its effectiveness is assessed later. Studies comparing balloon tamponade with surgical options such as Billings suture show no clear advantage. Given that uterine compression sutures and vessel ligation are effective, quick, and do not delay definitive management, intrauterine tamponade is not routinely recommended during cesarean delivery. However, it can serve as a temporary measure to control bleeding until surgical management is performed. A newer option is the vacuum-induced tamponade device known as the JEDA system, designed to treat hemorrhage due to uterine atony. Early studies report high success rate over 90% with bleeding control achieved rapidly, often within 3 minutes of activating the vacuum. However, effectiveness is lower in cases with higher initial blood loss. Despite promising results, current studies lack control group, limiting the strength of evidence. Therefore, most robust research is needed before recommending routine use, especially in cesarean deliveries. Pelvic arterial embolization in PPH. Pelvic arterial embolization has emerged as a reliable and safe alternative for managing postpartum hemorrhage when medical treatment fails. It is particularly recommended in high-resource settings, but its use is limited to situations where the woman is hemodynamically stable and when an embolization facility is readily accessible near the delivery unit. However, during cesarean delivery, arterial embolization is not immediately feasible as it can only be performed after abdominal closure. Importantly, one of the core principles in managing postpartum hemorrhage during cesarean is to avoid closing the abdomen until bleeding is controlled using readily available surgical techniques. Therefore, in most cases, pelvic arterial embolization does not have a role in the immediate intraoperative management of hemorrhage during cesarean delivery. An important exception exists in advanced tertiary care centers equipped with hybrid operating suites. In these specialized settings, embolization can be performed almost simultaneously with cesarean delivery, minimizing delays and allowing rapid control of bleeding. Such innovations have significantly improved the feasibility of the embolization, especially in planned high-risk cases, such as those involving placenta acreta spectrum. In summary, while pelvic arterial embolization is highly effective, its role depends heavily on timings, patient stability, and in situational resources. Abdominal packing is considered a last resort life-saving option for controlling persistent life-threatening postpartum hemorrhage even after peripartum hysterectomy. It is most often used in cases of diffuse pelvic bleeding, particularly due to disseminated intravascular coagulation, where a conventional surgical measures fail. This technique is part of damage control surgery. It involves placing sterile pads over bleeding areas followed by temporary closure of the abdomen under tension. These packs are then removed after 24 to 48 hours during a planned reoperation once the patient is more stable. Evidence suggests that abdominal packing can be effective with a success rate of around 60%, although it carries a high mortality rate, reflecting the severity of these cases. Current European guidelines consider abdominal packing as a bridging procedure used after failed hysterectomy to stabilize the patient until definitive treatment, such as arterial embolization, can be performed. Delayed postpartum hemorrhage after caesarean delivery. Delayed postpartum hemorrhage refers to bleeding that occurs or persists after abdominal closure following a caesarean delivery. This diagnosis is particularly challenging because bleeding may be concealed, accumulating the abdomen, retroperitoneal space, or within the uterus as clots without any obvious external blood loss. In such cases, clinicians must rely on indirect warning signs including tachycardia, hypotension, rising shock index, increased respiratory rate, altered consciousness, and abdominal or shoulder pain due to internal bleeding. A key danger is cognitive bias, especially tunnel vision or premature closure, where postpartum hemorrhage is indirectly excluded absence of visible bleeding. A crucial principle must always be remembered. Any unexplained clinical deterioration after caesarean delivery should be considered postpartum hemorrhage until proven otherwise. Bedside ultrasound may help detect intrauterine clots or hemoperitoneum, but it can miss retroperitoneal bleeding, particularly from unrecognized surgical injury. Therefore, if internal bleeding is suspected, re-laparotomy should be performed without delay, as it is both diagnostic and therapeutic. In selected stable patients, a contrast-enhanced CT scan may help identify conditions such as retroperitoneal hematoma or uterine artery pseudoaneurysm. But imaging must never delay treatment. Maternal mortality review highlight that delayed or misdiagnosis of concealed hemorrhage remains a major cause of preventable death, often due to misinterpretation of signs like tachycardia or hemodynamic instability. Early warning systems such as MEWS and MEWT can assist in detecting deterioration, although their role in this setting is still evolving. In summary, delayed postpartum hemorrhage is often silent but life-threatening and requires high suspicion, early recognition, and immediate intervention to save the lives. Special consideration in delayed PPH. The recurrence risk of postpartum hemorrhage is relatively low, around 5%, and importantly, future fertility and obstetric outcome are generally not affected. One important but often under-recognized cause of delayed postpartum hemorrhage is uterine artery pseudoaneurysm. This condition typically results from surgical injury to the uterine vessels and may present with late, sometimes sudden bleeding. In such cases, selective arterial embolization represents an effective and targeted treatment option. Finally, beyond the immediate control of hemorrhage, clinicians must not overlook adjunct care following postpartum hemorrhage. This includes prevention of thromboembolic complications, appropriate antibiotic prophylaxis, and addressing psychological consequences such as post-traumatic stress disorder and postpartum depression. Comprehensive care after postpartum hemorrhage is essential not only to ensure physical recovery but also to support the woman's long-term reproductive and mental health. Management of delayed postpartum hemorrhage. Effective management of delayed postpartum hemorrhage after cesarean delivery begin with strong communication between the obstetrician and anesthesia team. Management generally follows the standard principles of postpartum hemorrhage care while recognizing that delays in diagnosis may worsen the clinical condition. Medical management. The first line treatment is oxytocin aimed at improving uterine contraction. If bleeding persists, second line agent should be administered, including prostaglandin analog, ergot alkaloid, manual evacuation of retained placental tissue or intrauterine clots may also help enhance uterine contraction. Although evidence in delayed PPH is limited, tranexamic acid is commonly recommended in PPH, but in delayed cases, it may be less effective if given late and may even be harmful in suspected coagulopathy. Resuscitation and surgical decision. All resuscitative measures, including fluid replacement, blood products, and hemodynamic support, must be initiated promptly and integrated with medical therapy. If ultrasound detects intra-abdominal fluid, re-laparotomy is clearly indicated. However, if ultrasound findings are negative, re-laparotomy should still be strongly considered due to possible false negative imaging. Risk of retroperitoneal bleeding from surgical injury. Surgical management. Surgical options include pelvic vessels ligation, uterine compression sutures, and in severe cases, peripartum hysterectomy. Importantly, tamponade technique, whether intrauterine balloon or vacuum induced, have no proven role in delayed PPH after cesarean delivery. Evidence shows that their use does not reduce the need for invasive procedures. Therefore, intrauterine balloon tamponade should only be used if it does not delay definitive management. Embolization in delayed PPH after cesarean. Some authors suggest that pelvic arterial embolization can be considered as an alternative to re-laparotomy in carefully selected cases. This applies when the woman is hemodynamically stable, she is close to an embolization facility, and the surgeon believes that a surgical injury, especially to the uterine pedicle, is unlikely. However, embolization is generally not considered the safest first option for refractory delayed postpartum hemorrhage after caesarean delivery. This is because the situation differs significantly from hemorrhage after vaginal delivery. After a caesarean, a laparotomy has already been performed, and unrecognized surgical injury remains a major possible cause of bleeding. In addition, embolization requires time to organize, often up to an hour, whereas re-laparotomy can be performed immediately. Importantly, there is no strong evidence that embolization is superior to surgery in controlling bleeding or avoiding hysterectomy. When can embolization be considered? Despite these limitations, embolization may be appropriate in advanced center with hybrid operating suites or highly selected stable patient with persistent slow bleeding. It is particularly useful when vessel ligation was previously performed. Initially controlled bleeding but later failed due to recanalization of ligated vessels. Effectiveness and outcome. Success rate for embolization after caesarean related PPH range from 75 to over 90%, though slightly lower than after vaginal delivery. The risk of serious complication is low, less than 5%, and importantly, future fertility and obstetric outcome are generally preserved. A key indication is uterine artery pseudoaneurysm, a delayed complication of surgical injury, whereas selective embolization is highly effective. 2 practical management algorithms are proposed for postpartum hemorrhage in setting of caesarean delivery. The first address intraoperative BPH occurring during cesarean delivery. The second focus on delayed postoperative BPH occurring after abdominal closure. These algorithms integrate key recommendations from major international guidelines, including those from American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and are adopted from French guidelines. Among the few that specifically differentiate management based on the mode of delivery. Conclusion: managing postpartum hemorrhage during or after cesarean delivery presents unique and complex challenges. These include accurate estimation of blood loss, identification and management of surgical injuries, mastery of uterine sparing techniques, and early detection of occult delayed hemorrhage. Importantly, the quality of available evidence remains limited, with most guidelines extrapolated from data on vaginal deliveries. Therefore, clinical experience, observational data, and maternal mortality review play a crucial role in guiding the practice. A key lesson consistently highlighted is the importance of early re-laparotomy when intra-abdominal or retroperitoneal bleeding is suspected, especially in hemodynamically unstable patients. Any clinical deterioration after cesarean delivery, even in the absence of visible vaginal bleeding or clear ultrasound finding, must be considered postpartum hemorrhage until proven otherwise. Any clinical deterioration after cesarean delivery, even in the absence of visible vaginal bleeding or clear ultrasound findings, must be considered postpartum hemorrhage until proven otherwise. Re-laparotomy provides both rapid diagnosis and definitive treatment and should not be delayed, as timely intervention can be life-saving. Finally, successful management depends on strong teamwork and clear communication between the obstetric and anesthesia team. This ensures timely administration of uterotonics, effective resuscitation, and prompt escalation to surgical intervention when needed. As we conclude, it is important to remember that postpartum hemorrhage during cesarean delivery remains a major cause of maternal morbidity and the mortality worldwide. Timely recognition, effective communication, and a structured, stepwise approach to management are the key to saving lives. From medical therapy to surgical intervention, every second counts and every team member plays a critical role. Preparedness, teamwork, and adherence to protocol can make the difference between life and the loss. Thank you.